Hey, it's Seth. Before we get started, I want to take a quick moment to mention a way you can support the Concrete Logic podcast. Whether you're looking to expand your concrete knowledge or want to keep the show going, check out the Concrete Logic Academy, concretelogicacademy.com. You can always make a donation directly at concretelogicpodcast.com. Any amount helps, and we truly appreciate your support. Now, let's get into today's episode. And welcome to another episode of the Concrete Logic Podcast. And today I have James Baty with me. He's the executive director of the Concrete Foundations Association. He's been in concrete for over 30 years. Is that right?
Time, but yes,
Yeah.
I'll have to admit to that.
Yeah. It's not that, to me, it's a long time, but I'm not too far behind you. And he also has his own podcast, which is cool, Behind the Mic. So check him out. I think we're going to put this episode out through his channel as well. So hopefully folks will check both of the podcasts out. But today we're going to talk about, normally on the, at least lately, we've talked about concrete chemistry a whole lot on this show, but James had a great idea about talking about chemistry in a different form. So today we're going to talk about networking and kind of the soft skills of networking. We thought that would be great to share, especially for folks that are coming up in the industry to, don't overlook this very important skill to have. So James, if you want to kick things off, that'd be great.
Seth, that's great. I appreciate finally collaborating with you. I've followed you for a few years now, and it's always good to bring together a couple of podcasts, but to just bring together industry minds, especially the guys like you and I that have been in the trenches for as many years as we have. And as we were talking through the setup and the focus that you have on concrete chemistry, and I love that, but I am never going to try to compete with a Dr. Belkowitz or Dr. Shezzy or anyone that carries those credentials. But chemistry is so important to us as people too. And I think we were just relating as we were setting up this call that when we build with concrete, and it's so important to us to understand the constituents that work within the mix and how they relate to each other, size, particle shape, chemical componentry, because it has to work together to produce the brilliance, the performance that we want out of that concrete. And as I think about that, that's the same thing that we want out of our people. That's the same thing that our businesses need, is we need people that are exposed to each other, that understand the gifts and the graces that each other bring to the table, and to spend the time to learn from each other. And that's what I thought we could talk about here on this cast today.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I was just thinking about because my kids lately, they're I was sharing with you, most of my career I was in operations and started off as a field engineer in the field and worked my way up through, and just recently moved over. I say recently, time flies by, James. It's almost 3 or 4 years now, but I've moved over to business development, so that's my focus for Baker, and so go out there and find work. And my kids, they're like, what does Dad do? They kind of didn't understand what I did when we actually went out and managed projects. But now I tell them I just go out and make friends. It's what I do.
And there's an art to that. And what I find myself repeatedly telling our emerging leaders is that you come to the table with knowledge. You come to the table with assets that everybody at the table wants to learn, wants to understand. So often we can present our society as you've got to pay your dues. You have to step up over time and prove your value before you can be invited to the table or invited into the conversation. As you're talking about your kids, I was thinking back to my very first professional engagement. Wet behind the ears, I was fresh into the concrete industry. Basically, I'd sat behind a computer and drafted details and tried to begin proving technical knowledge. And they needed somebody to go into a meeting in Lexington, Kentucky. It was for a brand new distribution warehouse that was being built. And the companies for the first time were exploring insulated tilt-up construction. And they wanted somebody to go in and prove that this large building could get built that way. And they sent me in. And I walked into the room, and there's engineers, and there's general contractors. There's the tilt-up superintendent that had probably 40, maybe even 50 years to his CV. And they all turned and they looked to me to prove a point. Can we do this? How are we going to accomplish these details? And invited me into the conversation. And that's when networking and this idea behind chemistry took off for me, because from that point on, I realized that I had something to tell that they were missing, information that they were missing. And all I need to do is to understand my role in being part of that conversation, to listen correctly, to listen completely, but be bold enough to go ahead and give my opinions. And that's what I've been exploring, over the last 30, 35 years, 25 years in association development.
Yeah, but the key, what you hit on, was the first part, was the listening.
Listening.
That's what folks overlook, I think.
Yeah. So when we talk about soft skills and the chemistry of networking based on your soft skills, listening's number one. You should walk into every environment being quick to listen, slow to speak. And I really appreciate today, for instance, ACI committees. I've been on, 15, 18 different committees. I think I'm on 7 right now. And I appreciate those environments because there's always a lot of work to get done. But when I observe young professionals sitting at the table and listening is not just ears, listening is also eyes. And you can see them working in the room, and you can see them digesting whose position has value, whose position has truth. And then when they finally engage the room, engage the committee meeting, they almost always have something really valuable to contribute.
Yeah. And I don't think you can speak without listening first, right? Because if you're gonna you're just gonna, well,
It depends. Yeah.
in our industry,
Yeah.
there's a lot of talkers.
Yeah. And so, we found ourselves in a really unique time in our industry. And I know every one of your listeners is waiting for us to start into a magic conversation on Type 1L, because every concrete conversation I've been in the last 4 years has at some point hit on Type 1L and the woes or the difficulties, the frustrations. But in reality, that too is just an example of needing the soft skills to apply to networking to create people chemistry so that we can understand what's changed and go and do the work necessary to make it high performance concrete once again.
Where do you think that communication lagged or didn't exist? Or
I think it was a series of corporate decisions that stopped at the decision and didn't progress effectively through communication as contracts and relationships were being built. When you make a change, the quickest thing to do the quickest temptation is to contain the change, to reduce the number of people that are aware of the change, because you're either not getting more money for it or you don't want to open yourself up to the impacts of those changes. And especially when you're dealing with products like the concrete industry, look at how old the concrete industry is and how many variations of concrete we've seen historically. Go all the way back to Mount Vesuvius and volcanic ash-based concrete from the Romans. But in reality, all the way along, we've learned through doing. We've learned through reacting. And so what's unique about this moment is we took a product that has a lot of experience, 30, 50 years of experience in some markets, and we just brought it into a new environment and decided it was a one-to-one change. Nothing's a one-to-one change. Everything impacts everything else. You don't suddenly pull a project manager out of your business with 25 years of experience and bring in and plug in a new project manager and expect for all of your projects to run in the same way. Cement's like that. So I don't think there's any dissimilarity whatsoever between the behavior of our concrete, the performance of our concrete, the behavior of our people, the performance of our people.
Yeah. What other, so we stay on task, because that's a
great risk when you bring me on your podcast.
Well, I think anytime you bring up the favorite subject of I'd say the decade so far.
Yeah. So back to networking. So let's pull back there. What are your opportunities? And I think that's the other thing that I've noticed in our industry is we are trying to produce at such a breakneck pace. So our project schedules and this is largely, I think, because of technology. Technology is teaching us to move at faster and faster rates. Communication technology, drafting technology, estimating technology, building technology, demolition technology. It's all about reducing time and gaining efficiencies. And so because of that, we've individually, we've kind of locked ourselves out of a mindset for what does it mean to take a moment and explore a network? What's the next networking opportunity? You and I were talking about the need for you to be the world of concrete. That's the next big networking opportunity for you to engage people in new ways. And many of them are your listeners, your regular subscribers to your podcast. Emerging leaders, I try to speak to them to say, what interests you about the work that you've been invited into doing, and where can you go to get more experience, more exposure? That's the networking that we need to spend the time. And we as business owners, as business managers, need to empower our team to get into those places, to spend, to take that pause and to learn.
Yeah. What would you say to someone that go back to that meeting that you talked about, that first meeting you had where people actually asked you, how do we build this building out with tilt? Those folks came to you and asked you, right? They kind of asked you. What about someone that's in that same stage in their career? Wonder if folks don't ask you and you're just there. Do you insert yourself into the conversation or do you focus on listening? I mean, how do you navigate that as a young professional?
I think that's a good question. And to me, the answer is yes. And I'll say, here's why my yes, I answer that, a seemingly option question with a yes, which means both. So when I went into that environment, I was scared out of my shoes. Like I was not ready for that meeting. And the first thing I did was I listened. I listened to the opening of the meeting. I listened to the concerns that everybody had. I listened to what I began to understand was their base, their foundation of knowledge. If you can understand the foundation of knowledge for the people in the rooms with you, then when you take the opportunity to insert yourself into the conversation, you're inserting yourself into the conversation ripe for the knowledge that you bring with it that instantly is the expertise. And what I would not have been prepared for, and what I wasn't really prepared for, is if I had walked into the room and been asked to give a presentation right off the bat as to how to integrate this product for their solution. Instead, I was brought into a collaboration meeting. And I think, again, of the time frame that we deal with, the efficiencies that we're looking for in our modern day businesses, we oftentimes are inviting people in to give a presentation first. We have to listen first. We don't build a building by putting the roof on. We start with a foundation. We start with an excavation. And that's that listening period. That's the time where you develop an understanding for how the building is going to get grounded. How is my material going to perform the way that it's been designed to perform? Because heretofore, it exists in a digital world. It exists in a laboratory until we get out and we dig and we begin to place it. That's that crossover between the guys you and I know, the guys that we love to work with that have been doing this for years and years and years, and they've got grit underneath their fingernails and they've got concrete literally in their bloodstream, and those that are just jumping in or being pushed out into the market.
Yeah. Yeah, in that situation, it's a little different. But I think we were talking about is if you're going into a networking situation, say at a convention or some kind of, social, maybe social local event, and the networking thing is new to you, and you know how it is. You go in a room and there's folks grouped around, and they're in pods of 3 and 4, and they're having a conversation. And so, what kind of advice would you give someone in that situation? How do they handle that?
Yeah, that's really good. Because the networking is the intimidation side of it. In
Right.
fact, so often I will see, and I just had this conversation with a mentee that I've been assigned through the American Concrete Institute, that there is a tendency in these networking situations to coagulate based on your uniqueness. You find others that are identical to you because it's easy to share in that way. It's difficult to share cross-generation. It's difficult to share cross-discipline, contractor to engineer to academia.
Yeah.
And so I think that environment is best attended to if you walk in and you just stand there. You join the conversation and be content to listen. Invariably, you're going to get noticed, right? You're not going to be that wallfly that gets ignored. You're going to get noticed because you've stood there for a period of time listening to the environment, which also then gives you the foundation to speak. But I think our tendency to prove ourselves up front needs to take a back seat and let ourselves, just like the meeting I went into where my whole purpose for that meeting was to provide a solution. You still have to develop the foundation. You still have to develop the invitation to participate, not because you've earned it, but because you've been noticed, you've been appreciated. And that's not to say to young professionals, wait and speak when you've been asked to speak, but it's a different side. It's a different soft skill of understanding the nature of relationships, and I think preparing the space that you're in to receive what you then what be.
Are you, I'm sure you talk to others about this, but that mentor relationship that you have, are you talking to them specifically about these type of situations, or what about, is there any discussion going on about how to translate these soft skills into a, say, internal meeting at the company you work at? Again, you're you know, maybe not as seasoned as some of the folks you work with, and you're oftentimes find yourselves in this meeting and you can sit there and listen like you suggested and do that at every meeting. But at some point, I think you got to maybe raise your hand and say something without physically raising your hand. You don't want to do that, right? You don't want to go, hey, I want to talk, but
My turn.
yeah, my turn.
Yeah.
Because I will say in our industry, the reason why I brought this up, again, just based on my decades of experience, I try to not say that too often, but you find yourselves in this industry that we have a lot of alphas in our industry, and it seems like it's the one who gets the last word in is the dominant alpha, right? And so in these, it doesn't just happen during times of conflict. It also happens in times of like having these regular meetings. So everyone's got to say something, and they got to talk over each other to kind of show who's the king of the room, right? So to me, as a young professional, you got to navigate that as well. So what would you say to someone that was in that situation?
Yeah, and I also, so there's one more aspect that I want to make sure we don't lose track of, and
Okay.
that is the value. And you kind of mentioned it just a little bit there, but the value that you bring back to your company. Again, when we're talking about today's business environment where companies are really holding tightly their employees and are deploying them with efficiency and effectiveness, get this job done and then move on to this schedule and get this job done and then move on to here. So the idea of relinquishing time and maybe even travel expenses to these networking opportunities for company owners is a large risk. And probably not very, it doesn't feel very natural these days. As the young emerging leader, one of the things that I'm trying to advise on is how do you build value to your company? And so in that environment that you just described, the time that you spend listening, even if it's just a small window of listening to make sure that when you do speak into let's say you joined a group with 6 alphas, and I'm a 20 something and I've got my degree and I've been given my initiative. I need to go to this networking event and I need to come away with it so that I can prove value. Listening to what they're talking about then gives me the ability to ask questions. And what I love about podcasts is that take somebody like you, and when I'm given the opportunity to do my own podcast, I would much rather ask the questions. I need to listen enough to find where this is going so I can ask the right question to get to the result that we're looking for out of this podcast. Meandering guy like me, my thoughts go all over, and I almost connected you to watching 28 years later just the other night when I was thinking about alphas. And so I'm that shiny object, squirrel, where do I go here with this idea? But I think the purpose investment that companies need to make in networking, sending individuals, we need to prepare them to go into that space, to listen, ask a couple of the right questions so that through those questions, I can then make the statements that are impactful to the meeting itself. But more importantly, then I can extract the information that I can go back to my company and teach the company.
Yeah.
And that's what the company opportunity is to release, empower, distribute into the market, into these networking events, the right people, the fresh idea generators to come back and teach the companies even more.
Yeah. Because the reason I brought that up was when we were talking initially about going into one of those networking opportunities, and you suggested to kind of align yourself with maybe someone that, I mean, that looks like you. Hey, that looks like a contractor. I'm going to go talk to if you're an engineer, you go, and that looks like an engineer, you go talk to. At some point, you got to cross pollinate. You got to insert to. And so, me personally, found myself in situations where, you're just like, people are just talking over themselves. And I'm one of those people, because I've gotten this feedback from folks in my past is, Seth, we want to hear more from you. And I was like, I'm not one of those people that's going to come over and try to talk over someone. So I wait for my spot to insert something. And typically it's a question, which drives some people crazy. I found, why Seth just ask questions? He just asks questions. And
I'll bet in a lot of those situations, Seth, they've left thinking you're one of the smartest people in the room.
I never think about that. I was just
I know you probably don't, but
no.
That's my experience is that the person that asks the right question, asks the thoughtful question, asks the provoking question. And here's another thing. You talk about the alpha males that are trying to get over, or the alphas, period, that are trying to get over one another, because it's not necessarily alpha males.
Right.
They're not listening. They're not listening to each other. They're one-upping each other. And sometimes the right question is the connecting tissue that makes all of those relevant, brings them all back together again and gets them collaborating and gets them working together, which is, again, is another soft skill lost.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. I would say there's more talkers than listeners out there for sure. What else advice do you want to give today before we end?
So another soft skill that I think is really important in this setting is follow-up. One of your greatest assets as a collaborator and a contributor are the connections that you make. One of the ways of securing the value of those assets is the follow-up. And so what I would say to anyone, you don't have to be an emerging leader. You could simply be new to the networking environment or seasoned in the networking environment, but have never deployed this exercise. Within a couple of days after one of these environments, send a note. If you can do a physical note, great. If you do a digital note, it's sufficient. But I've got a thing right now against relying on digital communications. I feel like we're inundated so much that most people just pass over them and they never land.
Mm-hmm.
But reach back out and express your gratitude, or remind them of a thought that you'd like to follow up sometime if you get another chance. Engage them in such a way that makes your time with them memorable. Because the other thing about networking environments, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking about an association convention, a World of Concrete, committee meetings at ACI, it could be even your local Ready Mix Association gathering. You meet so many people, you come away, there's no way you can remember everybody. The people that you're going to remember are those ones that followed up with you afterwards, thanked you for your time, thanked you for your thought, or engaged you with an afterthought, whether that be a question or maybe you've thought about it all the way home, took a plane ride and kind of processed what you had been talking about, and you remembered this point, and so that you can offer that back out. To me, that's how you solidify those relationships. And then the second part of that is the next environment that you're in, invite that relationship to continue. Invite a connection in some way, coffee, lunch, just a meetup. Hey, remember we we met in Boston at ACI 6 months ago or a year ago or whatever. Are you planning on attending this one? Hey, could we get together? I have a couple questions that I've thought of since we were last together. That's where you turn those assets into real value.
Yeah. Yep. Well, this was great. James, did we cover everything you wanted today?
Oh, well, I always cover what I what I want because I just, talk. As long as this is valuable to your listeners, that's what my real goal is I just want to give people unique thoughts that, break the paradigms a little bit about what it means to be in industry. And I think the most valuable thing that you can take from any of these podcasts and your investment in yourself is that you bring value. You inherently bring value because you are. And so now what are you going to do to build that value? Hopefully that we gave them some tools to do that today.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. And I will share, as always, folks, if you check out the show notes, how to get a hold of James. If you want to reach out to him and find out what next convention or, spot that he's going to be at, so you can quiz him on this because you want to, like you said, ask him questions.
Yeah, and if you make it to World of Concrete, maybe we'll do a follow-up podcast together.
Oh, yeah, that sounds good. All right.
Love it.
All right, James, thanks for coming on the show today.
Appreciate it.
And folks, until next time, let's keep it concrete.